In this week's episode, we explore the lives and struggles of stubborn farmers. This is Talk Ag to Me. Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brendan Black, and in today's episode, we interview Caygeon, also known as Andy Junkins, who's the founder and owner of the company Stubborn Farm, a company in which he uses to help out farmers who are a bit too stubborn and are potentially harming their farming practices. And what I mean by that is he actually consults with farming families who are maybe conflicting and are struggling to get ideas across because there's a little bit of too many chefs in the kitchen and just a few too many stubborn ideas to break through. And so that's going to make a whole lot more sense in the episode. But before we get into that episode, I do have a few announcements in regards to Talk Ag to Me and the show as a whole. So this podcast, as I'm sure you have noticed, has remained pretty difficult to keep consistent because I've got my master's project going on. I'm about to start student teaching. I'm still finishing my graduate level classes. There's still a lot on my plate. And so because of that, it's really difficult to get episodes out once a week anymore. The scheduling and the recording and the editing is just too much for me to do by myself. So in order to make sure that I can be a little bit more consistent with my upload schedule, I'm going to be shifting to a bi-weekly upload schedule. So I'll be posting every other Wednesday now, as opposed to every Wednesday like we were before. Just for a little bit, just until I'm able to catch up and get a decent amount of episodes recorded, and I feel comfortable with my ability to edit all those episodes and get them out in a timely manner. But for the sake of my own sanity, I'm going to be moving to that every other week schedule, just to make sure that I can make sure you guys are getting quality content, but also I'm not, running out of steam in the process. So that's the first announcement. I hope you guys are okay with that. I appreciate you guys for sticking through and listening to all the episodes that have been coming out so far, even though they've been a bit spaced out more than I would prefer them to be. But I figured an episode every other week is much better than an episode every couple months, which is what I'm doing right now. So that's the first announcement. The second announcement is we actually have a new series going up on Talk Ag to Me. And I know that sounds a little bit contradictory. Why would I be starting a new series when I'm already having a hard time maintaining our current podcast? But trust me, this is a little bit different. Our new series is actually going to be a Minecraft series, which is all about learning how video games can teach us agriculture. And Minecraft's going to be the first game that we play. We're going to have some other games going in as well. But the series is called Ag Advancement, and we're going to use Minecraft to go through the different stages of the agricultural revolution, as well as learning about what different tools in Minecraft can be used to teach agricultural lessons. It's a lot of fun. I think it'll be really, really interesting. The trailer is already up. It went up on Monday. The first episode comes out this Friday, so make sure you check that out if you're interested in that sort of thing. Share it around, tell your friends. If it does really well, I'm going to upload more of them. That series is only going to be uploaded once a month. The second Friday of every month is kind of what I'm leaning towards right now, but it just depends on how my schedule ends up playing out as we get closer to those days. But I think it'll be a really fun series. I think it has a lot of potential to do some good. And I think it'll be a nice change of pace from just the average podcast episodes. But it's not going to be replacing the podcast by any means. If you're still loving Talk Ag to Me, that's great. I'm enjoying doing it. It's just going to be a little bit of a change of pace. So you're still going to have the every other week podcast episodes, but you're also going to have the once a month Minecraft videos and eventually some other videos as well. I do want to move more towards video content as I'm able to get the ability to, but I'm not going to be ending the podcast anytime soon. So don't worry about that. So those are all the announcements so far. Once again, thank you all so much for your support. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, follow, do all the things. Make sure you're sharing it not just with your online friends and family, but with your offline friends and family as well. But that's all I have for you. So thank you so much for tuning in, and let's get into the episode. All right. Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brendan Black, and in today's episode, we are joined by the one and only Andy Caygeon Junkin from the Stubborn.farm company operation. What would you call your...
Stubborn.farm is the company name, and it's also the website. So go to www.stubborn.farm.
Awesome. So if you could just start off, Caygeon, by explaining a little bit about who you are and what your operation is all about.
I help stubborn farmers work better together. I help farm families to stop being stubborn with each other and start being stubborn at the critical habits that matter. So I developed this program 15 years ago. I come from a stubborn farm family myself. What caused my family to be successful for 7 generations is the fact that we were stubborn, and then what caused my family to fail was the fact that we were stubborn. And I'm hell bent to change it so that other families don't go through the living hell that my family went through.
Yeah, for sure. That's when you reach out to me about this concept, it was something that I was really interested in. Kind of tackling the personalities of those involved in agriculture is a big theme on this show. So I thought that was really
Sure,
interesting.
sure.
So talking a little bit about the project and what specifically you do. So on the surface level, it sounds like mostly a consulting service for farming operations to help those families function a little bit better. Is that accurate, or how would you describe your services?
Well, 15 years ago, I started off as mediator.
Mm.
So I used to sit at the kitchen table and you basically have families arguing with each other at the kitchen table. And I got a reputation for being really good as a mediator. And so soon I was starting to fly all over North America. I've worked in 21 states, turn around the most dire situations. There's been more times I've got fingers that I've dealt with taking guns out of suicidal farmers' hands. So usually I was getting calls from farms where they already had 2 or 3 succession planners out there or mediators, and dealing with really dire situations where, somebody's considering suicide or somebody's, just put the farm up for sale. And then there was this moment where I was on a dairy operation, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, and there was 2 brothers that were in a partnership, and their mother was at the end of the kitchen table. And essentially 7 years before, their father had ran the operation with an iron fist. And basically over that 7 years without grandpa around, they really just had a hard time making decisions together as partners. They always were butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And it got really ugly. And I was sitting at the kitchen table, and they didn't have me out to try to sort out their problems. They were basically wanting Dr. Phil to judge that they were in their right and their partners were in the wrong. And everybody was just basically pointing fingers at each other and not wanting to not wanting to accept personal responsibility or want to shift blame. And grandma was at the end of the kitchen table, and she was just crying her eyes out. And stuff was going down. And this family was kind of unique in that the 2 sister-in-laws back in high school were best friends. And that day they were worst enemies. And there was this kid who was about 17, and he was leading his 4-H calf. And his mother complained before this kid just lived to dairy farm. He got up every morning to milk cows, and her mom's biggest complaint about her son was that he wouldn't change his clothes after coming home from school. He couldn't wait to get out at the dairy barn and milk cows. And that kid lived farming, but here he's leading a 4-H calf. And were you in 4-H, Brendan?
I was not, but I've helped out with a few groups, and I was in FFA.
Gotcha. Well, the thing about 4-H to me is that it's all about self-improvement. And the farm is a positive environment to bring out the best in a young man or young woman. And that was the irony of the moment. Was here's this kid out leading his 4-H calf, and who was being stubborn. And I looked at the kitchen table, and the 4-H calf and the farm was bringing out the best in this farm kid, and yet inside the kitchen table, the farmer was bringing out the worst in everybody. And it all came down to one word, and that word was that they were stubborn. And this family they were great people. They were people anybody would respect. They actually had won awards in their county for being the best farm family of the year a couple of years before. And essentially, what I realized there was Bible sitting on the kitchen table, and they were Christian Reform faith background, and it was open to a chapter of the Bible said Matthew 7:5. It said, "Do not take the speck of dust out of your own out of your brother's eye until you take the plank out of your own." And I don't care if you're Christian or not. That was a game changer for me in how I do things. And here I had been running all over North America, putting on 70,000 kilometers a year on my car, trying to get farm families to be able to make decisions together, but they were constantly pointing fingers at each other, but not wanting to make changes themselves. And the only way that we're going to change things here in North America is if we stop being stubborn with each other, and we turn start being stubborn at the critical habits that matter. If everybody looks at the farm environment not as an environment to bring out the worst in them, but the family farm environment brings out the best in them by continuously improving who you are. And that's the premise of my business is changed over the years from mediation to, something that I actually don't know of anybody else doing this across North America.
Hmm.
It's turned the word stubborn from a bad thing to a good thing for your farm family.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's almost more of a kind of redefining the typical idea of stubbornness from being, fighting without end into more of like a resilience idea, right?
Yeah. Basically, what I do is I meet with family. I meet with farms all over North America. I have farms from Prince Edward Island to British Columbia down to Mississippi.
Mm.
We do it all over Zoom. We meet for half an hour to an hour once a week or once a month, depending on the frequency the family wants to do. And we sit down and over 20, 24 months, we just, every meeting we have, we get everybody to come to the kitchen table with new ideas to improve the efficiency of the operation.
Mm.
So that, what I see with young lads is when they come home from agriculture college, they get really frustrated that they have great ideas to improve the efficiency of the farm, but mom and dad shut down those ideas. And that's because at some point in time, these suggestions for change are perceived by the parents and grandparents as criticism of past management decisions.
Mm.
And so, change becomes a prohibitive factor in the family farm. And, soon we get into bickering over stupid. If you squeeze out 10% more efficiency out of your operation, how are you supposed to talk about where the farm's going to be in 10 years' time?
Mm.
And so to do succession planning. And so what I do first is get the farm family to sit down and grandpa comes to the table with ideas to improve the efficiency. Aunt Martha, whoever's really involved in the day-to-day operations of the farm comes to the table with ideas to improve efficiencies. It can't be buying a combine or buying the farm next door. It's got to be little $1,000 ideas. It can't cost more than $1,000. It's got to return 300%, whatever you want to tweak, and really focusing on management improvements. And so if your grandpa is about to pitch his idea in 3 minutes, he's more likely to actually listen to the idea you have.
Mm.
And so what I focus on first is getting farm families instead of, in a lot of farm family environments, I don't know if you know this, Brandon, but there gets to be an attitude within the family that I'm smarter than you.
Mm-hmm.
Partners talk over top of each other, but they don't listen to each other's ideas.
Yep.
And we've got to turn that around. We've got to get farm families to, I see a lot of farm families that are really smart and make stupid decisions because it's a pissing contest as to who's smarter.
Mm-hmm.
We got to get the family making smarter decisions together by listening to each other. And if you do that, and you do that over 24 meetings, on the 25th meeting to sit down and do succession planning, it's easy. But you got to get the farm family. It's like building a fire. You start with a kindling first. You don't start with the big logs. A lot of farm families, they try to do a big expansion as far as building a new dairy. When kids come home to the farm, they want to do succession planning. They want to do a big change like building a new barn or hog facility. But you got to get the farm family used to making small decisions first and being aware of the pros and cons first. And then sitting down and make big changes is easy after that.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, no, for sure. And that kind of begs the question of something that we've been generally dancing around for the past few years in agriculture, but we're starting to get more and more kind of to the point about, which is the state of mental health and how we talk about it in the agriculture industry, right? Not just personally, but also the interrelationships of the families that are involved in agriculture. So like you mentioned, tensions can get kind of high when, one person wants to keep it one way, another person thinks that they have the right answer, and nobody actually has the right answer because you're all just trying to kill each other instead of actually do the job correctly, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're constantly butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of money slipping between the cracks because, it becomes more important to be right. And as a result, things ain't right on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
But we also don't think about how much headaches is caused by nobody listening to each other and how much stress and anxiety is created because of it. I mean, the two biggest issues, 25% of farms roughly take pills for depression and anxiety in agriculture. And we look at, I'm all in favor of, I think it's great that farmers are being more open and being more proactive in getting medication. But we haven't really solved the root issues. Like for instance, I had a high blood pressure, and I went in and got pills for my high blood pressure. And the doctor said, "Well, it's genetics." I said, "Well, what about diet and exercise?" He says, "Well, it's just genetics. Don't worry about it." right? And I think that's our attitude in North America towards pills overall,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're pills for high blood pressure or diabetes or mental health. We look at the genetic factors. We don't really look at the environmental factors. And the thing is that if you have day to day, if you don't know what the farm's going to look like in 10 years time, both as far as the ownership structure and also the farm business, what's the business model going to be? Is it going to be profitable? And then day to day, you're having constantly bickering, butting heads, and pulling the farm in different directions because there is a lack of everybody's not on the same page about how you want to manage operations. That's going to create stress to the max.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to fix the root issues of anxiety, you need to get a process in place so that you can sit down and make decisions together, and you can get long-term strategic planning as well as long-term succession planning in place.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to fix depression, you need to make farming fun again. And
Mm-hmm.
the first step to doing that is being able to make good decisions together and be able to work well together. So to me, it makes sense once a month to sit down and have a family business meeting where everybody exchanges ideas and you make improvements to how the farm efficiency. And then every meeting I have with the family, there's two things I want to change, and I do it in a subtle way. Is one thing I do is make one improvement in how you work together as a team, and then make one improvement in the character. So if your family, for instance, has a bad habit as a family about, say, something like anger management, that might be a character trait we work on, right? So if we can make one character improvement, so something like a cognitive distortion, such as turning a molehill into a mountain. If we can get the farm family to approach how they deal with problems differently, and it's not just you but your other partners that share this family trait. If you make one improvement like to character like that, and one improvement in how you work together every month for 24 months, your farm is going to be a hell of a lot different environment. And then sitting down to succession plan is easy after that.
Hmm. Have you heard of the excuse me? Have you heard of the podcast Ag State of Mind?
I have, yeah. We've been in touch a little bit.
Okay.
I think it's a great podcast. I recommend it to anybody, actually.
Yeah.
I
So
haven't been on it yet, but he's doing a great job.
yeah, Jason is a friend of mine. He's been on my show a few times. We've actually been on
Cool.
each other's. But yeah, he's kind of, well, as you're explaining this, he's kind of doing something not similar in the sense, but the conversation is the same. And how do we
Yeah.
improve the general conversation and mental state of those involved in agriculture? Because he offers therapy services and that sort of thing for
Sure.
farmers. And there's a big conversation. I was actually just around. Well, it was around this time last year. I was involved in an event. We were having discussions for the California Farm Bureau about how to tackle issues in mental health and in things like suicidality and that sort of thing in farming communities. And a lot of it came down to, like you've already mentioned, there's just not enough support for it. There's not very many people out there, not just like prescribing medication and giving pills to farmers, but there's not a whole lot of therapy services, not a whole lot of consulting services for that side of things. There's not a whole lot of people out there that are encouraging the groundwork fundamental level of fixing those issues before they become issues. So that way your job, the whole strategic planning and succession planning becomes easier, like you were mentioning there.
Yeah. I mean, there was a time that I had to take a shotgun out of a suicidal farmer's hands.
Mm.
And when I put the gun on the trunk of my car, I was like, this has got to change.
Mm.
And I've been hell-bent every day since. And it all comes down to fixing the root issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the root issues with farm families is we gotta address what are the key problems, how has farming changed? I think the thing that nobody's recognized, that is the number one problem that nobody's ever recognized in agriculture, is how succession planning has changed and how farm family dynamics have changed. Back in the 60s, when Dad was 60, he would retire because his hips were shot, right? So you'd only have one generation farming at a time. You might have the senior and junior generation helping out from time to time, but really it was one decision maker. But nowadays we have a situation where we have Grandpa, when he's 60 and he gets bad hips, he goes in for hip surgery and he's farming to his 80s or 90s. Mm-hmm. And if you want to farm to the day you would die, I mean, I'm all about making that happen. But the conundrum we have is that technology is a game changer, and suddenly we have 3 generations farming together. Mm-hmm. And because this equipment is so darn expensive, you can't split up the family capital every 25 years to split up between siblings. you got to keep it all together in order to be able to afford to be able to have the farming technology, to have the economies of scale to be able to farm successfully.
Mm.
So we got 2, 3 generations, 2, 3 siblings or cousins farming together. We got a situation, most family farms, that we joke about it. It's about there being too many chiefs, not enough Indians. And it's a joke that we say to the neighbors, but it is no joke. I mean, this butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions, it creates a whole level of stress that we haven't ever talked about.
Mm.
And we blame external factors like the weather and markets, but it's really the internal factors that's causing miscommunication and egos that is affecting the farm's bottom line, which is causing poor farm economics, which is also which is the root issue of what's causing low profitability and a lot of stress.
Mm.
And we got to fix the root issues first, and I'm hell bent to do that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah,
So
we
transitioning.
got to do fire prevention instead of fixing running around fighting fires.
Yes. No, absolutely.
And I probably have the most man hours of actually dealing with suicide out of farmers' hands.
Mm.
I've taken more shotguns out of suicide out of farmers' hands than anybody I know in North America.
Mm.
But I'm tired of doing this. We got to fix the root issues.
Right.
And quite often I get called out to farms where the sons and daughters are in 30s and 40s, and succession planning hasn't happened, and there's a lot of dysfunction. But the truth is that as a kid comes home to the farm, nobody gets married expecting to get divorced. Nobody goes home to the farm with their family expecting there's going to be problems.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all sunshine and unicorns. That's the root issue, is that we get into farming partnerships, or marriages, as I call them, and just expect it's going to be happily ever after. And that's just foolish. We got to have, from the start, we've got to recognize that there's going to be problems, and we got to evolve our business partnership nature so we transition from parent-child to professional working relationship. And so we're able to get really good at problem solving, so that because you're going to have problems in farming. The
Mm-hmm.
question is, how do you problem solve them together? And if you can get really effective at problem solving, you're going to have problems, but you can handle them successfully, and that could be your competitive edge, instead of the thing that caused your family to fall apart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. So you mentioned this before, that, that you help a lot with some of the issues that might come up with, if a kid like goes away to college, for example, and then comes back to the farm and there's
Yeah.
issues. Do you mostly deal with these multi-generational families, or do you ever deal with kind of new farms, or just single generation families, or is that not as much of an issue?
I mostly deal with farm families where they're going into a third generation, second or
Mm,
third generation.
I see.
I have given free advice to a lot of young farmers who want to get into agriculture, but my area of expertise is really dealing with multiple generation farms where they already have an established operation.
Mm, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Which theoretically, that would be where the most issues would arise anyways, right? Because you're having the conflict of multiple generations worth of
Yeah,
experience there.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So in terms of, you mentioned that this, you're one of the few people that who are doing what you're doing. Has there been any push in the community from your efforts, or have you done any collaborations with anybody to get more support for what you're doing on multiple fronts?
Yeah, I think I'm working. I actually have a university course that we're doing with a college,
Hmm.
a university this next semester. It's not official yet, so but we're just in the final stages of making it official. So it's actually as kids are graduating for their fourth year of college, they're able to take a course which is basically for 6 weeks, like a life coaching course, where you really decide, why do you want to farm? What do you really want out of your operation? Really envision what the lifestyle you want, as well as your parents going through the same process. Because a lot of farm families, as the kids leave the house, a lot of parents have problems with midlife crisis, I guess you'd say.
Hmm.
So get really crystal clear on your goals, and then sit down for 6 weeks as a family and get the fundamentals in place, so that you can have the ground rules in place, so that you can have a successful farming partnership. So I have that program going on with the university, and we have a similar program going on with we've piloted it with Washington State Farm Bureau, and there's a few other state farm bureaus that are piloting it as well. And the thing is that I'd be happy to work with any organization, a farming organization, like Young Farmers and Ranchers. I spoke at Young Farmers and Ranchers conference in Kentucky last year at the National Young Farmers and Ranchers Convention. But we're really interested in working with any ag group where they have a passion for making sure that the family farms stay for continuing to go and grow for the next 50 years. I'm not interested in helping. I mean, I don't sell life insurance products. I don't sell any financial products. My focus is on changing the fundamental nature of the word stubborn from being a bad thing to a good thing for a family farm. And I think that I'd be remiss to not talk about succession planning a little bit further. A lot of folks don't realize that 77% of farms do not have a succession plan. 77% of farms do not have a succession plan. And that's not because they haven't had a succession planner out at the farm. It's because I would say 95% of farms have had a succession planner out to the farm by the time the son and their daughter are in their 30s. The problem is that 77% of the time, there's somebody that came out to the farm most of the time trying to sell life insurance or financial products, but they leave frustrated and saying that family's stubborn. And the truth is, if your family cannot sit down and squeeze out an extra 10% efficiency here and there by actually listening to each other, there's no way in hell that you can talk about where the farm's going to be in 10 years' time. You got to fix that first. And if you can fix that first, then, I do this over 24 meetings to just evolve how the family makes decisions together. And then in the 25th meeting, we sit down and we do succession planning. It's an afternoon conversation instead of a 10-year family feud. And I've done the same process. I've actually done that. Like for farm debt turnaround. I've done a lot of farm debt turnarounds. I'll give you an example. I had a farm February 1st, 2019, they called me up and they had $17 million pulled. From the bank said, you need to go get it at a different bank. We're pulling your loan. And the thing is that I helped them get new financing within a week. But more importantly, that when I sat down with these guys, there's several different partners involved in the operation. I don't want to get into too much detail, so nobody can guess who it is. But it was multiple partners involved, and basically what it was everybody's butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And they wanted to make decisions that day. One partner wanted to get rid of the cows. One guy wanted to sell some cash crop land. I said, guys, we're not making any decisions like that first. The first thing we're going to do is get little $1,000 improvements here and there and get you guys learning to listen to each other. And then 6 months later, we sat down and we took the cap off of $1,000. And it was about a 3-hour meeting. We had a meeting. And the next week, we sat down for another 2 hours. And the third week, we made several changes. One was to sell 10% of the land. And those guys actually reinvested some of the capital from the sale of that land. And they invested into a new venture on the farm. I'm not going to get into details so nobody knows who it is. But I can tell you for a fact that they were on a podcast last fall, and their biggest complaint was they don't have enough land to grow that crop on. And they farm over 10,000 acres. And I'm really proud of that farm. And I think the thing is that whether you have a farm debt or farm succession case, or you have a mental health issues on your farm, what you got to do is fix the fundamental issues of turning stubborn from a bad thing to a good thing. If you can fix that, you can do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. Just to kind of to clear some things up. So you mentioned strategic planning and succession planning and all that. For anyone who might not be familiar, could you just explain what, like you mentioned how you do it, obviously, but could you explain actually what a succession plan is and what it's meant to do?
Well, I think that's a really important point is, so generally what happens now in America, in North America, in the majority of cases, is that a farm family sits down and do succession planning so that they basically transfer assets from one generation to the next. And for the 23% of farms that do have a succession plan, I would say at least half of them, it's done under very hostile conditions. It's really not a succession plan, it's a hostile takeover. And essentially what happened, I've seen a lot of situations where the son and daughter are in their 30s and 40s, and sometimes the 50s. And the spouse says, look, we have spent 20 years on this farm building it to where it is today. We pretty much doubled the size of this farm. And yet we don't own the house we live in. We don't own the truck we drive. All we have is a promise from your parents that someday it will all be yours. And quite often I see situations where there's that understanding between the son and the the father, that, if you work on this farm for 30 years and you grow it, that this farm will be yours. But often, if a patriarch dies, mother might have a different understanding. And quite often I've seen situations where the patriarch promised to pass over the farm to the son. Matriarch is the last one to live, and she actually splits up the equity amongst her 5 siblings, 4 of whom are in a different state. And I have seen that happen where guys have taken a $5 million farm and grown it to a $20 million farm. And they have to buy out. Not only they don't get a, I mean, I see, to me, what makes sense is that there's what I call the 9,000 hour rule. And this, to my knowledge, there's nobody else doing this, but I'm a really big advocate of it. So basically, as a son and daughter come home to the farm, okay, I think that there's a period of time that they have to prove that they want to be a partner. So it's the same thing if I went to work at a software startup company. I proved myself for a couple of years that I really am not just there for salary, but I'm really there to grow the business. And I'm really somebody that they want to have an ownership stake in the company, and then given the opportunity for an option plan. Well, to me, what makes sense for a farm family is that for the first, it's what I call the 9,000 hour rule. So basically, for the first 3 years that the son and daughter come home to the farm, each year you're expected to work 3,000 hours. That's just the average of what a farmer works in the industry. And if you're not, you got to be this tall to get on the ride, is what it comes down to. The same thing if you're going to become a manager at a startup software company, you got to be this tall to get on the ride. So you got to put in the hours. You also have to have a performance review. So whether that's monthly or quarterly, each month we make one improvement to an incorrect belief, a character flaw, and a skill deficiency. So an incorrect belief might be, I see a lot of sons, they are dairy farmers, and their mom gets the dairy barn before they do in the morning, right? They sleep in an extra half hour later. Well, if you want to be a partner, you got to prove to your parents that you want to be, you're serious about being an owner. And that starts with you owning the day, getting up to be at the dairy barn before your parents are, putting the extra long hours. The character flaw might be something like anger management, like we talked about before, being passive aggressive or procrastinating. It might be you make one improvement. So say somebody procrastinates, change that character flaw. If you make 24 improvements everybody's got 5% about their character that could go from good to great, and if you can make 24 improvements over 24 months to your character, then you've got a successor that doesn't just have potential, but is putting out their full potential. That's somebody that whether you work at a software company or you go work on a farm, that's a partner that the owner of that equity wants to have an ownership at stake in the business and seeing it grow. And then third thing is skill deficiency. There's a lot of farmers where the family patriarch does things like bookkeeping and commodity trading, and they control that job responsibility to the day they die. I've seen guys go into the hospital and they expect that they're going to go out. They just have a little bit of cancer, but they never make it out of the hospital. And they're trading corn on their deathbed. And here their son and daughter have millions of dollars to trade, and they might have taken a course at college, but there's a big difference between theory and practice. And to me, it would make sense as soon as the son and daughter come home from agriculture college that you'd start trading 5% of corn. Doesn't mean that grandpa can, feels like a man because he's able to trade corn right up to his deathbed, God bless him. But it's really important that you're not just starting, this is not the place for on-the-job learning. The difference between farming from 50 years ago was back in the 50s. If you made a mistake in farming, you go drive a school bus for the winter and you make up for your mistakes by an off-farm job. Nowadays, the mistakes you can make in a month on a farm could be what it's going to take you. It would take you. You could lose the farm just like that quick. I had a buddy of mine. He graduated from college. He was the top of his class in the commodity trading. He actually he did better than I did in school. His dad, he was 35. His dad had cancer for 2 years, and so he had taken the crops off, but his dad was trading corn in right up to his deathbed. And suddenly my friend had to do the trading. He lost $500,000 within 6 weeks.
Wow.
And that's quite easy to do. So I think it's really important that we have successors that are going to be successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in succession planning, everybody looks at the transfer of assets, who gets what, how to avoid paying taxes. And I think that succession should be simply a strategic plan. So what I believe that a succession plan should be is that for 2 years, you come home from college, you prove that you want to be a partner, and then you, at the end of two years or 6,000 hours, you sit down with your family and you develop a strategic plan about if you've proven yourself. Only if you've proven yourself. If you're not this tall to get on the ride, then it's time for us to have a conversation in a pleasant way within the family about what is it you're really passionate about and how can the family support you to go down that career path. But I think that after that 6,000 hours, you get a plan drafted, and then you have a year for the family to really contemplate it and tweak it, and then everybody agrees to it, and then your sister sister that's not in the state, that is not involved in the dairy the farming operation, it's very clear and transparent plan. And if they feel that that's not fair, that they want a different succession strategy, they have the same opportunity to come home and earn equity just like you did. But if you're going to take a family business and put your all into it, and you take it from a $5 million farm to a $20 million farm, then obviously, because of your toil, that farm is going to grow. If you're not around, your parents are going to probably sell the assets, and there's going to be very limited assets left at the end of the day after your parents' long retirement, right? But the thing is, if you have a succession plan where you clearly understand what you're earning instead of being gifted over the next 30 years, I believe that succession strategy shouldn't be gifting any assets from day one. I think it should be a clear, transparent strategy between that's understood between the farming and non-farming siblings as to how the farming successor can put their shoulder into the business and grow it over the next 30 years, and what percentage of the ownership that they're earning over that period of time of the growth. And then more importantly, after 30 years, after mom and dad's funeral, how can the farming successor, buy the equity of his non-farming successors out from them in a way that's sustainable, usually over a 30-year period after mom and dad's funeral, and in a way that's sustainable. So I mean, how many times I know that you're, Brendan, that here in the Midwest, there's a lot of farms. They do not, I mean, 67% of farmers do, or 64%, I forget which one, have a will. The rest don't. And there's a lot of farms where there's multiple siblings, and suddenly the farm is sold as an auction. And there's a lot of families that got along great when the kids were in their early 20s, but because there's a lack of transparency about how the estate was going to be settled, their siblings don't get together for Christmas. And more importantly, family farms, I mean, if you're farming and and there's a lot of farmers that have worked for 30 years, basically paid $2,000 a month, basically got a truck to drive and a house to live in, but that's it. And suddenly they have to buy out their non-farming siblings for a business they've taken from $5 million to $20 million. It's just impossible. And that's why only 12% of farms are being successfully transferred to the third generation. We got to fix this root issue. And, to me, the two issues are a transparent strategy that's agreed upon by the family, that's fair to everybody. And second of all, building successful successors, taking successors with potential and grooming them to their full potential, not just gifting them to them because they're in the Lucky Sperm Club. And I think that should happen from day one. And for farm families where, the sons and daughters in the 30s or 40s, and they are in a situation where they're still struggling with this, I still think that, if there's 2-year period that you go through the same type of process of talent grooming, every month make a couple improvements to your efficiency, then your siblings that are in California or away from the farm will have more trust in the fact that you turn your weaknesses into strengths and want to retain their ownership of assets in your farm instead of having it at fire sale prices.
Mm.
And it's an easy way to, I mean, there's a lot of parents that want to be able to pass over farms to their kids in their 40s, but they have some reluctance as to whether the kid can do it or not. And if you have a process where you can just tweak a few bad habits and turn them into good habits, everybody's happy in the end. And it really improves the odds of the family still farming together in 30 years' time.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Hearing all that made me think of a something from my own experiences. So my best friend, his grandparents owned one of the most popular dairies in my area, and then probably decade or two ago, uh, we lost them to unfortunate circumstances. But his dad and then his dad's siblings inherited the dairy, but his dad kind of basically talked the other two siblings into buying out their portion, so he owned the entire rest of the dairy.
Yeah.
But that was back in 2007, 6 or 7, like right before the recession. And so he sold off the dairy, anticipating, something like that to happen. And then it kind of worked out in his favor that, he just barely sold it in time before the milk prices hit the tank. And then he, would have lost a ton of money. So it worked out in that situation. But because of that, him and his siblings hardly ever talk anymore. They had
Yeah.
such a falling out over, what happened to the family farm, that it's just one of those things that you tend to not think about how tense those situations can be until you see it happen. But no, like you said, it's absolutely true that, if if those things are not established early on, if you don't nip the little things in the butt, and if you don't get that foundation established, it can really destroy the dynamic of the family. It can destroy the integrity of the farm. It can upset the structure of the economic viability of that family's operation. There's so many things that rely on competency of the farmer, and also a good relationship between the generation that is going to be retiring and the generation that'll be taking over that operation.
I think there's two dark secrets about agriculture we don't talk about openly. And one is that when grandpa dies, how do siblings make decisions together?
Mm-hmm.
And usually what happens if there's three partners involved, um, one partner might be voted off the island, but eventually none of the partners are talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is, what's the sense in building up a successful farm and a successful family if it's all pissed away in 15 years' time, because you didn't groom your kids to be able to make decisions together as equals.
Mm-hmm.
There's basically somebody that expects the other person to be a slave. And I think that the fundamentals, I mean, just like marriage has changed in the last 100 years, where back 100 years ago, basically the wife was subservient to the husband.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's today's equal partnerships. But the truth is, in our society, we have a 50% divorce rate because we're struggling with this issue. How do we stop having that "I'm smarter than you" attitude and be able to work together as a team?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same way, it's important to I know when I got married, instead of thinking it's going to be sunshine and unicorns, my wife and I were marriage counseling the first quarter. So every fiscal quarter, we sit down, we make one improvement of how we work together as a team, and we have a marriage that's actually exceeded my expectations. And hell, if you knew me as a bachelor, it would exceed everybody's expectations. But the thing is that we got to stop being entitled and think it's going to be sunshine and unicorns. You got three things that are working against you. You got low farm economics, which I think that it used to be back in the 60s, you just had to be better than average. And as long as you're better than average, you weren't in the bottom 10% of the bankers' shit list, I guess you'd say, you were fine. But the truth is that only 10% of farms are going to be around in a decade's time. And if you want to farm, you got to be in the top 1%, or shooting to be in the top 1%, not just trying to avoid being in the bottom 10%. And that means looking at three things, not being entitled, but assuming that you're the underdog in three different categories. One is having successful business. Two is having a successful business partnership. And three is having successful marriages.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for farm families from day one, to try and evolve all three categories and get rid of this power struggle between partners, and be able to create heaven on earth. It's not just a nice thing to talk about. It's an absolute necessary thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the other thing that I want to talk about just briefly is for the farms where there was a hostile takeover, the 23% of farms that they do have succession planning, at least half those farms were hostile takeover.
Mm.
And essentially, they may sit down at the lawyer's office and sign over assets from one generation to the next. But and there might be a 6-month honeymoon period where, everybody's on speaking terms and everybody thinks it worked out for the best. But the truth is that you didn't fix the fundamentals of how the patriarch and the kids work together. And at some point in time, in most cases, the kids at some point in time get frustrated by a comment that's made by the patriarch that's maybe intended or unintended. And soon mom or dad are asked not to come out to the shop. And I think it's a really sad secret about agriculture, but there's a lot of farmers that they built up an empire and they're still on the home farm. They're looking out the kitchen window at what a successful thing they've built, but they're not welcome out in the shop. And that a lot of farmers die with their slippers on instead of their work boots. And I think that's just a shame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you got to fix a stubborn. You got to fix a stubborn so that instead of being stubborn with your mom and dad, you're able to make good decisions together. So it doesn't matter who has more equity in the safe. What matters is that you guys are able to take on the world together. Mm. And if you can do that, you can do anything.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. I think to end us off, would you be able to give any information, kind of a comparison of an operation that has worked with your services and then something that might not have?
Well, I think I can give lots of examples, but I like everybody that knows. Everybody says farming is a game of economies of scale, and it's true. Farming. If you have a $40 million farm or a $5 million farm, you got a slight competitive edge as far as the type of technology you have, type of competitive buying power you have with a $40 million farm. But I want everybody to think about two family farms that they know of. One's $5 million, one's $40 million farm. And let's just say that as of today, all the neighbors about both farms would say they're good, upstanding Christian families. But behind the barn, they're anything but Christian with each other, right? They're constantly butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. Now, let's just say the $40 million farm, they hear this podcast, they say, well, that's a great idea, but they don't do anything about it. They just keep on doing what they're doing, right? And every decision made is a constant bickering, butting heads, and pulling the farm in different directions. But the $5 million farm, they say, you know what? In order for us to survive, we need to do this. And over 24 months, they change how they work together. And they go from good to great. They stop being stubborn with each other, and they start being stubborn and turn bad habits into good habits that make a farm successful. Now, I got 3 questions for you. The first question is, if the next 10 years, 7 out of the next 10 years, times are really tight in agriculture. We have wild inflation, high interest rates. Who knows what the crystal ball is going to throw at us. Mm-hmm. But let's assume that 7 years out of 10, it's really tough times. My question is this, is who is going to be able to sit down as a family and make decisions that's going to improve the efficiency of the farm so they can overcome these tough times? The family has $40 million, but they're constantly bickering, butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. Or the family is able to sit down on a regular basis and problem solve. And everybody's butting heads and it goes from butting heads to pulling the same direction. The second question I got for you is which family is going to be able to do succession planning? The family that can't make simple production-related decisions, and as a result, are probably going to be bickering for the next 10, 20 years about succession planning, or the family is able to sit down and have an afternoon conversation about the long-term success of the farm because they got really good at problem solving. Mm-hmm. The third question I got for you is which farm do you want to work on? The family that's constantly bickering and butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions, or the family is able to make good decisions together and they're pulling the same direction. And you can judge for yourself which solution is best. Mm-hmm. My name is Andy Caygeon Junkin, and you can call me at stubborn.farm. Go to www.stubborn.farm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Caygeon. I really appreciate it. You had some really great points there that I'd be happy to share around. If you have any links or anything for like your website or anything like that to share around, send it to me. I'll put it in the description.
Sure.
Make sure it gets out there.
And I think folks can just go to my website, stubborn.farm. I actually wrote a book called Bulletproof Your Farm. It's actually my 5th book. And I'd be happy to share it with any farmer. And you can also go on to stubborn.farm and sign up. Listen to other podcasts by going to stubborn.farm/podcasts if you want to hear some me speaking on other podcasts. Okay. So you take care, and it's great thing that you're doing here, Brendan. I really like it.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it, and I hope that everyone that listened today enjoyed it and learned a thing or two about family farm dynamics and how those can be improved. I hope to catch you all next week, and don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer. All right, so there's Caygeon. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you learned a lot from what some of the struggles that farmers deal with are in their day to day. A lot of people recognize that farmers can be stubborn at times, but maybe don't realize what that stubbornness can actually do to their operations. So thank you so much, Caygeon, for really giving us a really good look into what some of those struggles look like and how that can be dealt with in a way that helps both the farmer and the production operation overall. But yeah, thanks so much. I'll make sure to put all of Caygeon's information down in the description below so you can go check it out. If you are a farming family that you think could use his help, then feel free to reach out to him. If you're not, then maybe ask him some questions if you're curious about what he does in more detail than what we covered today. But yeah, so that's all I have for you for this episode. Once again, we'll be posting every other week. So I will see you guys in 2 Wednesdays. So not next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday will be our next episode. And I think it'll be a good one. I think you guys will enjoy that one. It'll be a lot of fun. And also, if you're interested, go check out the new Minecraft series that we have going up on the channel. The first episode comes out this Friday, but the trailer is already up, so you can go check it out and see if that's something that you might be interested in. But that's all I have for you. So once again, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, do all the things, follow, share with your online and offline family, all the things we usually say. And if you're interested, go ahead and donate to the Patreon. It is very much appreciated, but it is not at all obligated. But that's all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.